Sergeant Daniel Briggs was trapped in a cellar in Arnhem for 48 hours, while German troops searched house by house for survivors. He didn't die of hunger. He didn't die of cold. He almost died because his own mind began to destroy him from the inside out. In absolute darkness, without communication, without knowing if he would be found or rescued, his mind began to offer such compelling thoughts that he almost surrendered to the Germans just to make the mental torment stop. My grandfather found Briggs's diary years later, and the first line of those 48 hours read, "The most dangerous enemy wasn't outside looking for me, it was inside my head convincing me to give up." During those 48 hours in the dark, Sergeant Briggs discovered something that would change not only his survival in that basement, but his entire life after the war. He realized that his mind was not his ally. It was a weapon that could be used against him or by him, depending on who was in control. And in the first 26 years of his life, he had never truly controlled his own mind. He merely obeyed the thoughts it produced as if they were unquestionable orders. My father documented that Briggs developed in that basement a brutal method of mind control that not only kept him alive when other soldiers in similar situations went insane, but completely transformed how he lived after returning home. You will discover the exact protocol Briggs used to take control of his own mind before it destroyed him, and how to apply this method in your invisible war against thoughts that sabotage you every day. I found Sergeant Daniel Briggs' diary in a locked metal box in my father's closet, hidden behind military uniforms he never wore again after returning from the war. Briggs had served in the same unit as my father during Operation Market Garden, and when he died in 1992, he left his diaries to the few men who would understand what was written on those pages. My father never showed me those notebooks while he was alive, but when I began reading them after his death, I understood why. What Briggs documented wasn't war heroism or glorious victories. It was the brutal discovery that the real battlefield wasn't in the streets of Arnhem or the fields of Holland. It was inside one's own head, where thoughts could kill as efficiently as German bullets. The first entry in the diary, written while still in training before the actual combat, read, "I spent 26 years obeying my mind as if it were my ally. I never questioned the thoughts it produced, never challenged the stories it told, never realized I was being controlled by something that should have been under my command." For 48 hours, trapped in that cellar in Arnhem while German troops searched house by house for survivors, Briggs faced something more dangerous than the enemy soldiers outside. He faced his own mind trying to destroy him through thoughts so compelling they almost made him give up on life. He meticulously noted how his mind began to offer elaborate narratives of why resisting was futile, why surrendering would be the wise decision, why fighting to survive would only prolong inevitable suffering. And what devastated him was not that these thoughts were irrational or obviously false. They were logical, convincing, presented with all the appearance of practical wisdom. His mind used its own inner voice to convince him that giving up was the intelligent choice, and he almost believed it, because for 26 years he had never learned to differentiate between thoughts that served his survival and thoughts that served his destruction. But in that dark basement, when he realized he was minutes away from surrendering not to the Germans but to his own mind, something fundamental changed. Briggs understood that having thoughts didn't mean he was obligated to obey them, that his mind constantly produced narratives, but he had the power to accept or reject those narratives. That real mental control wasn't about stopping thinking or suppressing negative thoughts. It was about developing the ability to observe thoughts without being dominated by them, to recognize when his mind was working against him instead of for him. My father had underlined several times the passage where Briggs wrote, "I discovered that I am not my mind. I am the one who observes the mind. And while I merely obeyed each thought that arose, I was a slave. But when I began to observe thoughts as data to be evaluated, instead of orders to be followed, I regained control." You live in the exact same slavery that almost killed Briggs in that basement. Your mind produces thoughts that sabotage you, that convince you to give up, that transform challenges into catastrophes, that offer 1,000 reasons why you can't, shouldn't, won't succeed. And you obey these thoughts as if they were absolute truths, instead of recognizing them for what they are. Narratives that your mind produces, and that you have the power to accept or reject. If you want to honor Sergeant Daniel Briggs and learn the method he developed in 48 hours of total darkness to control the mind before it controlled him, leave your like now. Don't abandon this soldier who was almost destroyed by his own mind, but discovered how to transform it from an enemy into a tool. Briggs entered that cellar at 5 p.m. on September 17th, after his unit had been decimated by German fire in the streets of Arnhem. He had hidden there, planning to wait only a few hours until complete darkness before attempting to reach the Allied lines. But in the first 6 hours of absolute darkness, his mind began to do something he had never experienced with such intensity. It produced thoughts so convincing, so logical, so seemingly wise that he accepted them as absolute truths without question. He noted, "My mind told me that I was surrounded, that there was no escape route, that resisting would only prolong the inevitable." And each thought seemed to be observed fact rather than what it really was, invented narrative based on fear. What Briggs discovered was that his mind did not differentiate between thought and reality. It treated its own inventions as if they were confirmed data from the external world. During those first 6 hours, he meticulously documented every thought that arose and how he reacted automatically. When his mind said, "You're going to die here," his body responded with panic, as if death were a confirmed certainty rather than an invented possibility. When his mind said, "Surrender would be wiser," he began to rationalize surrender as if it were a strategic decision rather than capitulation to fear. When his mind said, "Resistance is futile," his willpower crumbled as if futility were a verified fact rather than a pessimistic interpretation of uncertain circumstances. And the pattern he identified was devastating in its simplicity. He obeyed thoughts automatically because he had never learned that thoughts are not orders. They are merely data produced by the mind that may be correct or completely wrong. But what Briggs recorded in more detail was the discovery that his mind had a systematic bias toward producing destructive thoughts under stress. It didn't produce, "Maybe you'll survive if you wait until dark." It produced, "You will definitely die if you don't surrender now." It didn't produce, "The situation is difficult but not impossible." It produced, "The situation is impossible and resisting is foolish." It didn't produce, "You have a chance if you stay calm." It produced, "You have no chance and panicking is the appropriate response." And each thought came with such conviction, with such an appearance of practical wisdom, that he accepted them without realizing they were biased interpretations rather than objective assessments. My father had circled the passage where Briggs wrote, "I realize that my mind under stress functions as an enemy. Propagandist. It produces narratives designed to make me give up, and presents these narratives with enough authority for me to accept them as truth." You are living the exact same pattern that almost destroyed Briggs in those first 6 hours. Your mind produces biased thoughts that magnify dangers, minimize capabilities, and transform challenges into impossibilities. And you obey them automatically because you never learned that thoughts are not facts. They are narratives that your mind invents, often based on fear instead of reality, and you have the power to question them instead of blindly accepting them as if they were unquestionable absolute truths. Around midnight, after 7 hours of total darkness, Briggs reached his breaking point. He was seconds away from leaving the basement and surrendering to the Germans, not because he rationally believed it was the right decision, but because his mind had become so unbearably noisy with thoughts of despair that he would do anything to silence it. And then, at the very moment he was about to open the door, he had a realization that changed everything. He wrote, "I realized I was hearing a voice in my head saying, 'You need to get out. You need to surrender. You can't take it anymore.' And suddenly I understood that if I was hearing the voice, then I was not the voice. There was a self observing the thoughts and a thought being observed. And this separation completely changed my relationship with my own mind. This was the discovery that separated men who controlled their minds from men who were controlled by them. The recognition that you are not your thoughts." Briggs deliberately began practicing this separation. Each time a thought arose, instead of automatically accepting it as truth or an order to be obeyed, he observed it as if it were an external object to be examined. When his mind produced, "You're going to die here," instead of reacting with panic, he observed, "My mind is producing the thought that I'm going to die here." When his mind produced resistance is futile instead of collapsing, he observed, "My mind is producing the thought that resistance is futile." And this shift in internal language from "I'm going to die" to "my mind is saying that I'm going to die" created crucial distance between him and the thoughts. He was no longer merged with every narrative his mind produced. He was observing narratives as data to be evaluated, rather than truths to be automatically accepted. But what my father had underlined 3 times was the part where Briggs described how this separation didn't eliminate negative thoughts. His mind continued to produce destructive narratives with the same frequency and intensity. The difference was that now he recognized that thought production was automatic and beyond his control, but thought acceptance was a choice under his complete control. He wrote, "I cannot control what thoughts my mind produces, especially under extreme stress, but I can control whether I obey those thoughts or observe them as suggestions to be evaluated. My mind will continue to suggest that I give up, that I surrender, that I panic, but I am not obliged to follow these suggestions just because they arise with conviction in my inner voice." You never developed that crucial separation between yourself and your thoughts. When your mind produces, "You can't," you believe you can't, instead of recognizing that your mind is producing a narrative of inadequacy. When your mind produces, "It's too late," you believe it's too late instead of recognizing that your mind is inventing a story of futility. And as long as you remain fused with every thought that arises, treating thoughts as if they were you instead of products your mind generates, you will remain enslaved to narratives that destroy you. In the following hours, between 1 and 4 in the morning, Briggs developed what he called the questioning protocol, a systematic method of interrogating thoughts instead of automatically obeying them. Each time his mind produced a destructive narrative, instead of accepting it as truth, he subjected it to 3 brutally honest questions. First question, is this thought a verifiable fact or a fear-based interpretation? Second question, if I obey this thought, does it bring me closer to or further away from survival? Third question, does this thought serve my life or my destruction? He noted, I found that 90% of the thoughts my mind produced under stress were fear-based interpretations disguised as objective analysis. And when I questioned them using these 3 questions, the power they had over me completely crumbled. The protocol didn't eliminate negative thoughts. It eliminated automatic obedience to negative thoughts. Briggs described a specific example of how the protocol worked in practice. His mind produced the thought, "You are surrounded and there is no way out." First question, is it verifiable fact or interpretation? Interpretation, because he did not have complete information about German positions or possible escape routes. Second question, does obeying this thought bring me closer to or further away from survival? It further away, because if I believe there is no way out, I stop looking for ways out. Third question, does this thought serve my life or destruction? It serves destruction, because it convinces me to give up resisting. And when he subjected the thought to these 3 questions, he realized that it was not an objective analysis of the situation. It was a narrative of despair that his mind invented, and that he was not obliged to accept as truth just because it arose in his inner voice. But what my father noted most attentively was the part where Briggs explained that the protocol required deliberate practice, because the default pattern of the human mind is to accept thoughts without question. For 26 years, he had automatically obeyed every thought that arose, especially thoughts that came with strong emotion or apparent urgency. And breaking this pattern of automatic obedience required constant conscious effort in the early days. Each thought had to be captured and deliberately questioned before the old pattern of automatic acceptance could take hold. Briggs wrote, "It's like intercepting a bullet before it hits you. The thought is fired by the mind, but before it penetrates and causes harm, you capture it and examine it to determine whether it is a real threat or an invented threat. You are being dominated by thoughts you never questioned, because throughout your life you automatically accepted everything your mind produced as if it were absolute truth. When your mind says you will fail, you believe it without asking if it's fact or fear. When your mind says it's not worth trying, you give up without asking if that thought serves your life or your destruction. And as long as you continue accepting thoughts without questioning them, you will remain How slave to narratives that sabotage you. If you want to learn the rest of the protocol Briggs developed to control the mind, subscribe to this channel now. Join the ranks of men and women who have decided to stop automatically obeying thoughts and start controlling them. Don't abandon Sergeant Briggs. Subscribe and honor the method he earned with 48 hours of mental warfare. Between 4 and 7 in the morning, Briggs faced devastating frustration. Even using the questioning protocol, his mind wouldn't stop producing destructive thoughts. He had hoped that once he began questioning and rejecting negative narratives, his mind would eventually stop producing them. But the opposite happened. The more he rejected thoughts of despair, the more his mind produced them, as if trying to compensate for the loss of control by offering a greater volume of self-sabotaging narratives. And Briggs realized something fundamental that completely transformed his understanding of mind control. You don't control which thoughts your mind produces. You only control whether you obey or ignore the thoughts it produces. He wrote, "I spent hours trying to stop my mind from generating negative thoughts, and finally understood that this was an impossible battle. My mind will produce what it wants to produce. My power is not in controlling production, it's in controlling acceptance." This was the truth that most people never understand about mind control. It's not about silencing the mind or eliminating negative thoughts. It's about developing the ability to observe thoughts without being dominated by them, to recognize that thought production is an automatic process, but thought acceptance is a conscious choice. Briggs described how soldiers around him in similar situations had gone mad trying to force their minds to stop producing fearful thoughts. They fought against the thoughts, tried to suppress them, blamed themselves for having them, and this fight against their own minds consumed energy that should have been used for survival. But Briggs had discovered that accepting that his mind would produce destructive thoughts, especially under stress, and simply not obeying those thoughts was infinitely more effective than trying to prevent their production. But what my father had circulated was the passage where Briggs explained the analogy he developed in that basement. His mind was like a radio tuned to a station, broadcasting enemy propaganda 24 hours a day. He couldn't turn off the radio. He couldn't change the station, but he could choose whether or not to believe the propaganda he heard. The station would continue broadcasting messages of despair, futility, surrender. But he wasn't obliged to accept those messages as truths just because he heard them constantly. Briggs wrote, "My mind is enemy propaganda, disguised as my own thought. It transmits messages designed to make me give up and uses my inner voice to give an appearance of authority. But recognizing propaganda as propaganda destroys its power even as it continues to broadcast. You are fighting the wrong battle, trying to stop your mind from producing negative thoughts. You are wasting energy trying to silence what cannot be silenced, trying to control what is an automatic process outside of your direct control. Your mind will continue to produce thoughts of doubt, fear, and inadequacy. And as long as you fight against this production, you will remain frustrated and exhausted. But when you accept that this production is automatic and focus all your energy on controlling acceptance, you will finally have real power over your own mind." Around 10 o'clock in the morning of September 18th, after nearly 17 hours in the basement, Briggs faced the most brutal test of the method he had developed. He heard German troops entering the house above him, walking directly over the basement where he was hiding, and his mind exploded with thoughts so intense, so laden with panic, that he almost completely lost control. Each German footstep upstairs generated a tsunami of narratives. "They're going to find you. You're about to die. It's the end. There's no escape possible." And the intensity of these thoughts was unlike anything he had experienced in the previous hours. They weren't murmurs he could observe from a distance. They were internal screams, demanding immediate obedience through absolute terror. Briggs noted, "I found that the questioning method worked well with thoughts of moderate intensity, but when thoughts came with extreme emotion, my ability to separate and question them almost completely collapsed." During those minutes while Germans searched the house, Briggs did what he described as the most difficult application of the protocol. Instead of trying to question each thought individually, which was impossible given the volume and intensity, he simply acknowledged that his mind was in total panic mode and that everything it produced in that state was contaminated by extreme fear. He didn't need to evaluate each thought separately. He only needed to recognize that a panicked mind produces unreliable narratives and that he wasn't obligated to obey any of them just because they came with maximum emotional urgency. He wrote, "I learned that when emotion is extreme, all thoughts that accompany that emotion must be treated with utmost suspicion, not because they are necessarily false, but because a mind under extreme emotion loses the capacity to assess reality objectively." But what my father had repeatedly emphasized was the part where Briggs described how he survived those minutes without making a sound that would give him away or entering into total panic that would destroy him. He didn't try to suppress the thoughts. He didn't try to calm himself down. He didn't try to convince his mind that he was safe when he clearly wasn't. He simply observed the panic unfolding in his mind while maintaining control over his physical actions. His mind could scream whatever it wanted. His body would remain still and silent because his body obeyed his conscious choice, not the screams of his mind. Briggs noted, "I completely separated thought from action. My mind could be in total panic, producing 1,000 narratives of terror, but my actions were determined by conscious choice rather than automatic obedience to what my mind screamed." You fail exactly where Briggs almost failed. When emotion is extreme, you assume that the thoughts accompanying that emotion are truths that must be obeyed immediately. When you feel intense fear, you obey thoughts of escape. When you feel extreme anger, you obey thoughts of revenge. When you feel utter despair, you obey thoughts of surrender. And you never learned that emotional intensity doesn't validate thoughts. It only makes them harder to question. If you recognize that you have obeyed thoughts based on extreme emotion as if they were unquestionable, commands leave your like now. Don't abandon Sergeant Briggs, who discovered how to separate emotion from action when his life depended on it. After the Germans finally left the house around noon, Briggs went through the most difficult hours of his entire time in the basement. Not because of the external danger, which had momentarily diminished, but because his mind had been so intensely activated by panic that it could no longer calm down. Even with the Germans out of the house, his mind continued to produce terrifying thoughts as if the danger was still present. And Briggs realized something devastating. His mind did not differentiate between real danger and imagined danger. It reacted with the same intensity to threats that existed only in his imagination as to threats that existed in the physical world. He wrote, "My mind was killing me with dangers that no longer existed. The Germans had left, but my mind kept reliving those minutes in an endless loop, producing panic as if they were still over my head. And I realized that this was the real enemy, not the mind reacting to real danger, but the mind creating imaginary danger and reacting as if it were real." At that time, Briggs developed what he called physical anchoring, a method of using concrete bodily sensations to interrupt mental loops of destructive thoughts. When his mind spiraled into panic about imagined dangers, he deliberately focused his attention on immediate physical sensations. He felt the cold ground beneath him. He listened to his own breathing. He observed tension in his muscles, and this shift in focus from mental narrative to physical sensation created an interruption in the thought loop, not because the physical sensations were pleasant or comforting, but because they were real and present, while the thoughts were imaginary and about future possibilities. Briggs wrote, "I have found that a mind trapped in a loop of terror is always focused on an imagined future. Anchoring, attention to present physical sensation, creates interruption because it forces the mind to deal with what is real now instead of what it imagines will happen." But what my father recorded in most detail was the part where Briggs explained that physical anchoring wasn't a relaxation or comfortable meditation technique. It was an emergency switch used when the mind entered self-destruct mode through imagining catastrophes. He didn't use it to feel better. He used it to break the mental pattern that was destroying him. And the effectiveness didn't come from creating calm or peace. It came simply from redirecting attention from imaginary narratives to immediate physical reality. His mind would keep trying to pull him back into loops of terror, but each time that happened, he deliberately redirected his attention to some concrete physical sensation until the loop lost its strength. You are being destroyed in exactly the same way that you almost destroyed Briggs in those hours after the danger passed. Your mind creates imaginary dangers and reacts to them as if they were real. It relives past failures in an endless loop as if they were still happening. It imagines future catastrophes and produces anxiety as if they had already occurred. And as long as your attention remains captured by these imaginary narratives, you will suffer from dangers that exist only in your head. In the final hours in the basement, between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. on September 18th, Briggs had spent 48 hours practicing mind control under extreme pressure, and something fundamental had changed in him in a way he perceived as irreversible. He no longer needed conscious effort to separate thoughts from reality. He no longer needed to deliberately remind himself to question the narratives his mind produced. The protocol had become automatic through forced repetition under maximum stress. His mind continued to produce destructive thoughts, but now he instantly recognized them as products of the mind, rather than truths about reality. Briggs noted, "Something has permanently changed in how my mind works. It's not that negative thoughts have stopped arising, but my relationship with them has completely transformed. I see thoughts as I see clouds passing by. I observe them, I recognize them, but I am not dominated by them." When he finally emerged from the hold after dark and managed to reach Allied lines, Briggs carried more than just memories of 48 hours of terror. He carried a method of mind control tested under pressure that most people never experience. And during the following months of combat, he witnessed the devastating difference between soldiers who controlled their minds and soldiers who were controlled by them. Soldiers who controlled their minds recognized panic thoughts but did not automatically obey them. Soldiers controlled by their minds would freeze or flee because they believed that terrifying thoughts were objective analyses rather than emotional reactions. Briggs documented dozens of situations where technically competent soldiers failed, not for lack of skill, but for automatic obedience to thoughts their minds produced under stress. But what my father emphasized most was the part where Briggs described how the method worked decades after the war. In 1970, 26 years after those 48 hours in the basement, he wrote, "I live in a different world from most people, not because my mind produces better thoughts, but because I have developed a permanent capacity not to be dominated by the thoughts it produces. My mind offers narratives of failure, fear, impossibility every day, but I recognize them as offers I can accept or reject, instead of orders I must obey. And this freedom to choose which thoughts to follow has completely transformed how I live." You are being offered the same choice Briggs was forced to make in that basement. Either you learn to control your mind through deliberate practice now, or you continue to be controlled by it through automatic obedience to every thought that arises. Briggs didn't have the luxury of postponing this learning. His life depended on developing mental control in 48 hours. You have more time, but every day you postpone, it is a day you live as a slave to narratives your mind invents. Sergeant Daniel Briggs lived 46 more years after those 48 hours in the basement in Arnhem. When he died at 72, my father found one last diary entry, written just days before his death. Briggs had noted, "I lived 72 years, but my real life began at 26, in that dark basement where I finally learned that I am not my mind. Everything I built, everything I became, everything that meant anything came from 48 hours, where I was forced to choose between controlling my mind or being destroyed by it. The first 26 years were wasted automatically obeying every thought that arose. The next 46 years were lived in the freedom to recognize thoughts as products to be evaluated, rather than orders to be followed." My father had kept this last entry separately because it proved that mental control developed under extreme pressure was not a temporary skill that disappeared when circumstances improved. It was a permanent transformation of how you live. During those 46 years after the war, Briggs maintained the protocol he had developed in that basement, not because he was still in combat or because he faced similar dangers, but because he had discovered that civilian life presented different but equally destructive threats to those who did not control their own minds. His mind offered thoughts of failure when he started businesses. It offered narratives of impossibility when he faced challenges. It offered elaborate reasons why giving up would be wise when things got tough. And each time, he recognized these offerings as products of his mind, trying to protect him through avoidance rather than objective analysis of reality. Briggs wrote in a 1965 entry, "Most people live their whole lives without realizing that they are slaves to narratives their own minds invent. They accept limiting thoughts as if they were verified facts. They obey impulses to give up as if they were wisdom. And they die without ever experiencing the freedom to observe their minds instead of being dominated by them." You are reading about Briggs 80 years after he spent 48 hours learning to control his mind before it controlled him. 80 years and the truth hasn't changed. You are not your thoughts, you are the observer of thoughts. And as long as you continue to automatically accept every narrative your mind produces, you will remain a slave to something that should be under your control. If you want to honor Sergeant Daniel Briggs and the 48 hours of mental warfare that completely transformed his life, then like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment describing which recurring thought controls you instead of you controlling it. Don't abandon this soldier who was almost destroyed by his own mind, but developed a method to transform it from an enemy into a tool. Help spread this knowledge to others who are being dominated by narratives their minds invent. Before I finish, I'd like to leave you with a question. What recurring thought is controlling you instead of you controlling it? And how much more time will you waste obeying narratives your mind invents? As if they were unquestionable absolute truths.